Egypt has embarked on what looks like a tough transition. The road back to electoral democracy may be quite a rocky one. And to move his transition agenda forward, interim President Adly Mansour needs support across the board. But does he have a transition roadmap that appeals to all players? And what plan does he have to reconcile a divided Egypt and put the country back on track at a time democracy appears to be under attack? Well, joining us for this discussion from Cairo is Ambassador Hussein Haridy, a former Egyptian Assistant Foreign Minister. Ambassador Haridy has also served as Egypt's envoy to Spain and Pakistan. And also joining us on the program from Johannesburg is Dennis Kadima, the Executive Director of the Electoral Institute for the Sustainability of Democracy in Africa. Mr. Kadima is also a former Senior Program Manager at the National Democratic Institute. But first, let's take a look at the challenges facing interim President Adly Mansour as he takes charge of the delicate transition.
Egypt's return to electoral democracy is set to be quite a rocky one. The signs are already there. Interim President Adly Mansour has picked Liberal economist and former Finance Minister Hazem El-Biblawi as the interim Prime Minister and opposition leader Mohamed El-Baradei as Vice President in charge of Foreign Affairs. To bridge the huge political divide occasioned by the acrimonious exit of Mohamed Morsi, Mansour's interim government is reaching out to the Muslim Brotherhood's Freedom and Justice Party and to the Salafist Noor Party with the promise of cabinet posts. But in a sign of escalating tensions, the Muslim Brotherhood promptly rejected that offer. They say they will not take part in any cabinet, quote, as long as Morsi is not back as president, end of quote. The temporary charter that is supposed to steer this fractured North African nation through a difficult transition is also under attack.
The reality is that chaos has ensued with a host of mistakes from the political and military forces during the transitional period. Parliamentary elections before the constitution was the first mistake, and the rest was built on it. Worst of all were the division within the community between Islamists and liberals. Ideology divisions are dangerous.
In a move that is likely to further entrench hostilities, Egypt's public prosecutor has ordered the arrest of the Muslim Brotherhood Supreme Guide Mohamed Badi, another top brass of the movement. They're wanted for allegedly inciting the violence that has claimed dozens of lives and left scores of others injured. Morsi is also being held at an undisclosed location.
The history is repeating itself. Just like in the 50s, the army is arresting Muslim Brotherhood leaders for inciting violence and killings, and even Morsi himself is under military custody. We now expect jihadists to escalate terrorist operations against the army in support of the Brotherhood.
Wrangling, however, has already broken out in the loose coalition that backed Morsi's removal as head of state. In contention is the transition charter that sets out, among other things, the elections date. The National Salvation Front wants it amended, while the Muslim Brotherhood has labelled it as a decree by putschists, and they have called for protests on Tuesday. This continued standoff has deepened fears of further instability in Egypt.
We are not withdrawing the whole participation in the dialogue. we are speaking in favor of all the Egyptians. So if we think there is a move forward to a democratic and political transition period, then we will participate, of course. Our positive approach has been implemented before in many other dialogue. So, I mean, all the Egyptians know that.
In a roadmap announced by Mansour, parliamentary elections are to be held within 6 months, after which a date will be announced for a presidential ballot. Egypt will also have 5 months to amend the current draft constitution suspended by the military following Morsi's removal. Thereafter, the constitution will be ratified, setting the stage for parliamentary and presidential elections.
Indeed, Egypt has been in the news these past couple of weeks. First, Ambassador Haridy in Cairo. Let's look back at Egypt in the last year, that roadmap to elections of 2012. What went wrong exactly? Can we say Egypt's democracy has been a failed experiment?
The problem, it seems to me that the outside world, including our African brothers, it seems to me they don't have a clear understanding of the true philosophy of the Muslim Brothers. For them, democracy is nothing but the ballot box, and nothing more and nothing less. And that's why we are not surprised that they are today claiming that they have legitimacy through the ballot box. But the ballot box is not democracy. The ballot box is one way, one mechanism of democracy. Democracy is an all-inclusive political process, and unfortunately, in this we failed utterly and disastrously in Egypt last year.
All right, Mr. Kadima, let me bring you here on that point. Legitimacy is not just the ballot box, according to Ambassador Haridy. They're looking at Egypt's transition in the past year, and from your assessment, what is it that went wrong? Was it too radical? Should it have been a bit more gradual? What went wrong in your assessment?
Yeah, I agree partly with the ambassador because indeed when a leader is elected as the head of state with almost half of the vote and the other half having voted for somebody else, they need to understand that they are legitimate, but they have a narrow mandate. And that requires consultation with others. You know, all these people wouldn't vote for the former president and his party as far as the presidential elections are concerned. But having said that, we must also highlight the fact that by having this military intervention to put aside somebody who was elected, we have gone from a bad situation to another bad situation. Because it means if tomorrow Egypt held another round of elections and that the military for one reason or another are not happy with that person, then we can have another coup. So it's a difficult road for the country. What I'm trying to say in short is, yes, there was a bad situation, and what we have now may have created also a bad precedent.
All right, Ambassador Haridy, there a bad situation creating a bad precedent. Is it possible for a civilian leader to rule, though, with the military there in Egypt lurking in the background?
Well, the relationship between the Egyptian people and the Egyptian armed forces is a very special relationship, not only in the Arab world, but in Africa and the world. We in Egypt, we don't consider the army military in the sense that the term is being used in literature, political literature, and outside Egypt. This is the first point I want to make. The second point is, of course, last year was a disaster on all fronts, on the security front, on the economic front, on the political front, and most seriously of all, it was an utter failure in consensus building in Egypt. Democracy, the essence of democracy, is to build consensus around the core problems and the core aspirations of the people concerned.
Is it possible for the interim government, though, to govern without including the Muslim Brotherhood?
Definitely. I guess the majority of Egyptians do stand behind the constitutional declaration, do stand behind the interim government and the interim president, and the majority of Egyptians are really keen to reach a workable and well-functioning Egyptian democracy in the future. That is, of course, basically would include all political parties and political forces, provided that all political forces and political parties are willing to abide by democratic rules. But if certain groups don't want to abide by democratic rules, and I think that Egypt can advance on the road to democracy without them.
All right. Mr. Kadima, the military remains a force there now in Egyptian politics. Where does this all leave Egypt's democracy?
Look, here again, I think the ambassador has described the problem very, very well in terms of what was happening, how the consensus was not built, and so on. The point I'm trying to stress as far as the military are concerned is that their role is actually a dangerous one, because the situation the country found itself in was actually started by the military at some stage. they allowed the elections of the president to go ahead before even Egypt had a constitution. So Mohamed Morsi was elected without a constitution. So it became very difficult at some stage to know what kind of balance of power existed between parliament and the president. So the military created that confusion. Of course, when Morsi came, he also, spearheaded a constitution without much consultation, or even if there was any consultation, it was really lip service. It was very much leaned toward the philosophy of his political group, if not a religious group. So what I'm saying is the military, when they were in power during the transition after President Mubarak, former President Mubarak was in charge, they made a lot of mistakes. And one of the things we are seeing now is a result of their behavior.
All right. So what difference, though, will this transition, the current transition, now be? How different will it be from the previous transition that you say had a lot of mistakes?
Now you are going to have a group, another group, going through a new transition with the Muslim Brotherhood, who also secured in the past 50%. I don't know what is their level of support at this moment, but they are not in the process. They are opposed to what is happening. So it will be a reversal of what we had before, where the President Morsi and his group were excluding others. Now you are going to have a group which is going to boycott the ongoing process. So for me, I don't believe that things augur well for Egypt at this moment. It will take very strong leadership to put things back on track, but more importantly, to achieve that, the group of Muslim Brotherhood needs to be brought back in the system. Otherwise, you'll have extra activities or extra parliamentary or legal activity or extra constitutional activities against the new order. So that's really my thinking.
All right. Ambassador Haridy, do you think that it's going to be a delicate process there for Egypt's transition, given that a certain section of the community of society will be excluded from governance?
All the stakeholders on the political scene in Egypt after the revolution of June 30th made clear that they don't want to exclude any political force in the country. And as a matter of fact, right now the Prime Minister designate, Dr. Hazem al-Biblawi, has invited all political parties, including the political parties that have a religious reference or a religious base, to nominate candidates to ministerial posts. So the philosophy in Egypt today is that the political process, the coming transition towards democracy, is open to all democratic forces in the country. And as I've just said, they have been invited to nominate their candidates to some ministerial posts.
All right.
Of course, I agree with Mr. Kadima that the transitional will be delicate, will be critical, but I'm sure that we will be successful in establishing a truly democratic order in Egypt in the next few months.
All right. Egypt's interim Prime Minister, though, has begun forming his cabinet. In the last year for former President Morsi, it was protest after protest. What will be the plan for the new Prime Minister? Will it be his first priorities? Will that be on security, on economic reconstruction? How soon can we see Egypt back to normalcy?
Well, I guess the two major challenges facing the government, the future government of Dr. Hazem al-Biblawi, the Prime Minister designate, will be the economy, restarting the Egyptian economy, and of course restoring security throughout the land. And I trust that Dr. al-Biblawi will succeed on both counts for many reasons. The first one is that he is, you know that he was a former Minister of Finance in the first government post-Mubarak era. So, and as a matter of fact, he wrote a book about his experience then. And so he is very knowledgeable about the, knowledgeable about the financial and economic challenges facing Egypt right now. He would be supported in his endeavors by the generous help and assistance that came from three leading Gulf countries: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, and the government and the state of Kuwait. You know that the three countries have donated generously to Egypt to the tune of $12 billion in less than 3 days. So I guess, as far as security is concerned, I guess now we are happy to see that our police forces are back on the street. They are welcomed by the people, and now I guess so security will be back. Definitely. Having said that, we expect, of course, the security situation in Sinai is very critical, but in the short and long term, the army and the police forces would bring the situation under control in Sinai.
All right, Ambassador Hussein Haridy, we'll leave it there for the moment. Ambassador Hussein Haridy and Dennis Kadima joining us from Johannesburg. Do stay with us. We will return to this discussion in a moment.
Culture Express. See the world in color.
I was making a pretty penny. I was traveling the world. I went to a travel agent and I said, look, give me a ticket that's going to stop in every airport around the world.
We intend to cause havoc.
The witch used to cause riots. Places would have to be closed down for weeks to repair the damage because the fans rioted.
This story was almost lost. Suppose I didn't live like the rest of the guys did it.
All right, welcome back to the program. Now, events in Egypt have raised fresh questions about Africa's electoral democracy and cast a long shadow on the ballot as a way of putting leaders in power. So what's wrong with Africa's democracy, and is it sustainable as a model? Well, kicking off this part of our discussion is former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan with his take on elections in Africa.
In elections, there will be losers and there will be winners. And those who engage in the elections must be prepared to accept the results, provided the elections are run with integrity and is fair. It is when one plays games with the political process that sometimes leads to social tensions and even violence. And so the question is not whether you have elections or not, but the quality of the elections. There have been lots of elections which have been a veneer to give the leader a false respectability, when in fact the elections were not true elections at all and were rigged. And those are the situations which often causes problems. But if it's election with integrity, which is transparent, accountable, open playing field, then the results and the elections itself are accepted generally, and the leader has legitimacy.
All right, Kofi Annan there talking about the question of elections and the electoral system in Africa. First to you, Dennis Kadima. Kofi Annan talked about elections becoming a veneer to grant legitimacy to some leaders in Africa. Do you agree?
Yes, I agree that elections, of course, are the way to access power, the way that is accepted and acceptable, because it's you know, the will of the people. However, we have seen experiences where once elected, and as we were talking about Egypt recently, once elected, the leaders think that they have a blank check, so they can use that power as they want, as they wish, without understanding that what they've received is only a, you know, is a mandate to exercise their power within a certain framework, which is the democratic framework, with you know, accountability, consultation of the population for key matters, and sometimes even referendum, depending on the countries, and of course accountability and so on, the rule of law. And I think people tend to ignore those aspects once they are elected.
All right.
So it's a very important point, and I agree with Mr. Annan.
What do you see, though, as the impact to electoral democracy following the recent developments, though, not only in Egypt, but also in Mali, where the army took over?
Yeah, I think the two situations are, while they have similarity, but they are also different. In the case of Mali, it was actually toward the end of the term, the electoral cycle, but the country was already at a war, so the army intervened to end the war, but also that affected the electoral process. In the case of Egypt, of course, there it was a change of the order following popular uprisal. I think the two countries are at a crossroads. As far as Mali is concerned, they have elections in 3 weeks' time, and you know, the country, part of the country was until recently under not under the control of the government, and that also will come with some challenges. But apparently, I can say the challenges that they have is in both countries, the change that took place was in a way violent change, a war or a uprisal, and it's never easy to establish democracy when you have such a situation. But as we say, democracy is a process, it's not an event. So it will all depend on how the leadership learned from their own experiences and the experiences of other countries, because, you know, elections and democracy in general, they are standard. All right. They are best practices. If people close themselves from learning from what's happening in other countries, they may find themselves reinventing the wheel, making the very same mistake that others have made in the past. But they stand a chance, but that will depend on the quality of their leaders.
Going forward, though, do you see Egypt remaining a democracy following the recent developments?
I think it will be very difficult for Egypt because if you look in any experience in the world, when an elected leader is ousted from power, it actually undermines a very basic tenet of democracy. People may say, okay, I've won today, tomorrow I can be removed. So I think Egypt needs to restore trust in the military, for instance. They must be guaranteed that there won't be any intervention in the future if there is a disagreement between those who are elected and those who are opposing them or who are from another segment of the population. Because you see, by resorting to a coup, even if it's not called like that, the military have put an end to a democratically elected president. So that means, they've neglected other avenue.
Right.
They could have really played a more constructive role in convincing that president that he was not elected for himself, and he didn't control 100%. He controlled only 50% plus a few more percent.
All right.
So I think it will be difficult. Again, as I said before, the quality of the leadership, their understanding of the situation, and the inclusion of everyone will be key.
All right. Ambassador Husseini, let me put that to you. Does Egypt see itself as remaining as a democracy?
Well, we cannot claim that during the last year we have successfully established a democratic model. On the contrary, the Egyptians who took to the streets starting from June 28th till July 3rd, almost a week, they took to the streets because they felt, and rightly so, that Egypt was not on the path of democracy. What we are trying to do now is to go back to basics, to start anew, and I'm sure that the majority of Egyptians are committed to the goal of the establishment of a true democratic order that will be all-inclusive, that will be based on consensus building, that will be based on respect for gender rights, that will be based on respect for human rights, and on the rules of good governance. I believe that we will succeed, and I'm very hopeful for the future of democracy in Egypt.
All right, Ambassador Hussein Haridy, we'll leave it there for the moment. Joining us from Cairo, Ambassador Hussein Haridy, a former Egypt Assistant Foreign Minister, and also he once served as Egypt's envoy to Spain and Pakistan. Thank you very much. And from Johannesburg, Dennis Kadima, the Executive Director of the Electoral Institute for the Sustainability of Democracy in Africa. Well, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us here on Talk Africa. I'm Beatrice Marshall in Nairobi. Bye-bye for now.